Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this slightly delayed episode of the Law of Self-Defense show. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Sorry. Got a lot going on today. A lot of balls in the air for reasons I'll explain in just a moment. We are here now to talk about an unusual, hopefully it's unusual, unusual at least that it was caught on camera, on film, car theft out in San Jose, lovely San Jose, California. Caught on, looks like Ring camera, doorbell camera footage of a very nice car. Looks like a Corvette to me, being stolen by a group of car thieves. Looks like there's about 4 of them. And they're shouting at the homeowner who it's hard to tell, but it might be communicating with the car thieves over these doorbell cameras often have speaker and microphone capability. And in fact, the homeowner may not even be home, right? Because you can do it remotely on the app. But in any case, apparently the homeowner seeing his car being stolen at night in San Jose, California by a group of 4 thieves. And the thieves are shouting at him not to come out of his house. Don't come out of your house. If you do, we'll kill you. You'll die. Don't die over a car. Don't be silly. So, what are the lawful options for this poor car owner who's just helplessly watching his very nice car get stolen by a bunch of, threatening car thieves? That's what we'll take a look at today. Not just under California law, but also, as always, I feel like we just did this a couple days ago in the defensive property discussion. But here we are again, defensive property. And one of the reasons we're here is because no matter how many times I talk about it, there's plenty of people out there that are still confused about what they're allowed to do in defensive property. I have an example of that from a Twitter exchange I had just this morning with somebody who I'm sure is a very nice person and very well-intentioned. I'm not trying to say anything negative about them personally, but they're poorly informed on what the law is. And that gets very dangerous when you think you're privileged to use especially deadly force, and it turns out that you're not, because then you make yourself very easy to convict. So this is the show we're covering today. Don't lose your life over a car, these thieves are saying. And while they're not apparently displaying guns, they're certainly acting in a way that makes one infer that they have guns. They have a hand inside some kind of pouch, for example. The guy on the left here, the little hooded jacket. But with all that out of the way, because I do have quite a bit to cover, let's jump right into the formal launch of today's show. And I do, of course, have to mention the sponsor of today's show, which is, let me slide this over here, which is none other than Law of Self-Defense itself. It is time, folks. It is the last 24 hours, a little less than 24 hours, 23 hours, until our Law of Self-Defense advanced class taking place tomorrow, Saturday, April 20th, starting at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, so 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This is our full-day course taught live by me, streamed to you at your computer, that teaches you how to be hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, your property, all in one day at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. We teach you about defense of yourself. We teach you about defense of others, family, neighbors, colleagues, even strangers, like an active shooter event. We teach you about defense of property, both highly defensible property like your home, all the way across the spectrum to least defensible property like your pets. I know people are shocked to hear this. Your pets are legally least defensible property. We spend almost an hour talking about interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event, a much more subtle interaction than I think many people understand. We do all that and much, much more, all in a single day, all in plain English, to make this expertise and insight actionable for you in the moment of crisis. When you know this stuff, you know where the legal boundaries actually are, and that's what we teach, actual law, not internet law, not Twitter law, actual law. And you conduct yourself within those legal boundaries, you genuinely make yourself hard to convict should the worst happen. And that's what we want for all of you, is to be so hard to convict, in fact, that you're an unattractive target for prosecution, and that you're that much less likely to be charged in the first place, much less brought to the expense and risk of a trial. Join me live tomorrow, lawofselfdefense.com/advance. We only teach this class twice a year, folks, twice a year. So if you miss this one, it'll be October at best. October 19th, I think, is the next scheduled date for this class. And by the way, if you have a conflict for tomorrow, and I get it, the weather's getting nice, although it just snowed here yesterday in Denver. But if you have a conflict for tomorrow, you can't attend the live class or all of it, register anyway, because we'll be sending all the registered students the link to the playback version of the class. You'll have access for at least a couple of weeks afterwards, and you'll be able to watch it at your leisure, the playback version, over that period of time. All of that at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. All right, so where should I start? Should I start with the video? I guess so. That's what everybody wants to see, right? I'll probably come back to the video a couple times, but just to set the tone for what we'll be talking about. It's not a very long video. It's only about 20 seconds long. Here it is. The car in question is the car on the right. I think that's a Corvette, right? I'm not really a car guy per se. Anyway, it looks expensive, and it's about to be subject to theft here. And the car thieves are shouting back, it sounds like, at the camera, "Don't come out. Don't die over a car." Here we go.
Hurry up! Hop in! Come out! Don't come out! You come out, I'm gonna shoot you! Don't come out! Do not come out!
It's a car, don't lose your life, dumbass!
Do not lose your life over a car! Do not lose your life over a
That's pretty much the whole video. All the beeps are the F word, of course. Sorry about that. I had to beep them out. It was so much of it. Do not lose your life over a beeping car. Arguably reasonable advice. Now, I know not everyone will agree. Many people will take the not unreasonable position that, hey, I spent my life paying for that car, right? I worked for that car. Hours, years of my labor, my expertise, my work, my energies went into buying that car. It's representative of my expenditure, of my life's resources. And although, the people who like criminals favor thieves for some reason, will tell you that, don't value your property more than you do your life, right? That's what insurance is for. Property can be replaced, your life can't. And others will respond, well, the thief is actually valuing my property more than the thief values his own life. Now, there are places in the US where you could use deadly force here to prevent this car from being stolen. That place is, of course, Texas. We'll take a look at Texas Penal Code 9.42 once again. But that's the only state where you're privileged to use deadly force in defense of mere personal property. And an unoccupied car, like here, is mere personal property. It's least defensible property. And in every state except for Texas, you're only privileged to use non-deadly force in defense of least defensible property, personal property. Only in Texas is there even the possibility of being privileged to use deadly force in defense of personal property in the absence of a threat to persons, or in the absence of a threat to highly defensible property. So there's another category of property, highly defensible property. It always includes your home, often includes a place of business, often includes an occupied vehicle. So the status of the vehicle changes depending on whether it's occupied or not. If it's unoccupied, it's just personal property. If it's occupied, if there are people in it, then it may qualify as highly defensible property, much like your home. And there are privileges to use deadly force in against another person in the context of defense of highly defensible property, where you would not have that privilege if you were just walking down the street. But it's important to keep in mind what's being protected when we're talking about highly defensible property. And the key is that it's not just a car, but an occupied car. It's not really that you're allowed to use deadly force to protect the doorknob on the front of your house or the shingles on the roof or the antenna on your car. What's being protected with that deadly force, deadly defensive force in the context of highly defensible property is the people inside the property. So the physical attributes of the property are serving as a surrogate for the people inside. Presumably, we don't have highly defensible property here. I'm presuming that this car is unoccupied by any, lawful occupier. Presumably, eventually, the thieves get in, and I presume successfully drive away in the car. So we have least defensible property here, and one of the reasons it can be easy to be misled by defensive property law in particular is that if you look at a statute or you look at a jury instruction, it can seem as if it's privileging you to just use force generally in the defense of personal property. By the way, I'm going to use as an example this Twitter exchange I had this morning where the discussion is over simple trespass, someone stepping onto your land, not invading your home, but stepping onto your land. Whether deadly force can be used in that context. Can you shoot a simple trespasser in the absence of a threat to persons, in the absence of defending highly defensible property? And this fellow on Twitter was convinced that he was privileged to do that. He felt in both Oklahoma and Texas, and then he shared some Oklahoma statutes. And unfortunately, he got misled by those statutes. You have to be very careful. The plain English reading of a statute can be quite dangerous. Again, and I'm going to share this Twitter exchange with you. I'm not trying to denigrate the person individually. Doesn't strike me as a bad person. Just strikes me as someone who's has a genuine interest, but misled himself on what the law actually allows. So, and California law is a little bit like that too. So when you read the California statute for the defense of property, it says you can use force to defend personal property. When you read the jury instruction, it says you can use force to defend personal property. But when you read the case law, the actual court opinions, they highly constrain this privilege to use force in defense of property. So I always caution, if all you've done is read the use of force statutes for your state, and many of you have done that. Many of you have gone and taken like a CCW concealed carry license class, and a portion of the class is devoted to the legal aspects of the use of force. And typically, normally because the state requires that be taught. And typically what they do is they read you a bunch of statutes and as if they've taught you something now. And they've taught you a little bit, but a little bit of knowledge can be quite a dangerous thing. And I would suggest that if all you've done is read the statutes and are relying on the apparent plain English reading of those statutes, you're at risk because the statutes don't mean what they appear to mean. They don't mean what the legislature might have intended them to mean. Statutes mean nothing by themselves. They're just words on a piece of paper. Statutes don't mean anything in the real world until they're applied by real courts, interpreted and applied by real courts to real defendants in real cases. That's when you learn what the statute actually means. And it's not uncommon for appellate courts to read words into and out of a statute, substantially either expanding or constraining the scope of that statute from what it would appear to mean if you just read the plain language. And that happens in California in their defense of property law. So I had pulled up a whole ton of stuff. Let's see. And that's one of the reasons I ran long. The other reason I ran long, of course, late today was because we are, ironing out all the final wrinkles for tomorrow's Law of Self-Defense Advanced course. Last chance, folks. Last chance. So the first thing we need to do when we're talking about Let's see. Use of force in defense of property. I had pulled up so many slides. Let's see. Because I had so many states I wanted to talk about. So, California has good protections for defense of one's dwelling. Of course, it classifies a home as being highly defensible property, which is great. That's what we should all want. I've got way too many tabs open, and I'm confusing myself. In fact, California is one of the many states that creates a legal presumption that if you're dealing with an invader into your home, that you have a reasonable fear of imminent death or serious bodily injury at the hands of that person. So when it comes to a home invader, California provides pretty good protection. Ironically, I should say, unfortunately, in many states, mere burglary in an occupied dwelling is sufficient to justify the use of deadly force in self-defense, including in states like New York, by the way. That's one of the explicit justifications for the use of deadly force, that the person who was killed was in the act of committing a burglary in a dwelling. California says burglary is not enough to automatically justify the use of deadly force, because a burglary can be done in such a way that it's not also manifesting in imminent threat to persons. Imagine like you left your garage door open and someone's stealing a bicycle out of your garage. They just run in, grab the bicycle, and run out. No interaction with you. That's a burglary. But California law says, absent some kind of definite threat to persons, a deadly force threat to persons, you wouldn't be privileged in using deadly force to defend that. And that person came into your home, right? At least into your garage. But it wasn't the kind of forcible, unlawful entry that California requires for the legal presumption of a reasonable fear from a home invader that I just referenced. What about defense of least defensible property? What does California say about that? Well, California only allows for the use of non-deadly force in defense of property. In fact, California doesn't even allow for the threat of deadly force, not just the use of deadly force, but it doesn't allow for the threat of deadly force in defense of property. You won't find that in the California statutes governing use of deadly force or in the jury instruction. The jury instruction does have a note that references the burglary issue I just talked about. But you have to look to the case law to see just how restrictive California is about the use of deadly force. I just picked one appellate court decision that I pulled up real quick just before this day's show started. This is People v. Chen. It's only a couple years old, 2020 Court of Appeals decision out of California. It is never acceptable to use or threaten deadly force solely to defend property. Now, they mean personal property here, not highly defensible property like against a home invader. And they mean in the absence of a threat to person. So they're talking, there's some threat solely to a piece of personal property, like this car theft, never acceptable to use or threaten force. And in this particular case, the defendant here, Chen, had not in fact used deadly force to protect his property. He brandished a firearm. And the opinion continues in contending that defense of property is a defense to brandishing. He was charged with the crime of brandishing. Defendant relies on 3 cases, but none of them convince us that defense of only property, meaning personal property, can involve threats of deadly force. Just can't do it. Can't do it. So, what do we have going on in this video here? We have threats of violence by the car thieves, right? They're saying, don't come out here or we'll kill you. But the fact that the person's not out there means it's not yet an imminent threat. I mean, we don't really know the person's in the home. They could be using the app for their camera. But let's imagine the person is in their home. Um, they're not yet in imminent danger. This is a future speculative threat of deadly force harm that may never happen. They wouldn't be in danger until they did something like came out of their house, right? So can they do that? Can they come out of their house to prevent their car from being stolen? Well, they can come out of the house and use non-deadly force to protect their car from being stolen. Unfortunately, here they'd be doing that in the context of being made aware that they're likely to get a response of deadly defensive force. Well, can they use deadly unlawful force against them, right? Don't come out here. We'll kill you. Don't die over your car. So they step out of the house intending to use only non-deadly force to defend their car. They find that they're met with an unlawful deadly force response. Can they then escalate to deadly defensive force, not in defense of the car, but in defense of themselves? Maybe it feels like it would be a lawful use of deadly force, but there's a complication here. One is the prosecution, especially in California, is likely to argue that that's not really what happened. You didn't go out there with the intent to use only non-deadly force. After all, you brought a gun with you, didn't you? They're going to say this looks a lot more to us like not an innocent effort to defend property using only non-deadly force, but mutual combat. That you were effectively extended an invitation to deadly force mutual combat, and you went out there intending to use deadly force in response. And if you're a mutual combatant, if you go to the fight rather than the fight coming to you, and that's what you're doing if you step out there with a gun, that's certainly what the prosecutor is going to argue, that you're going to a deadly force fight when you know is going to be deadly force. You've been told. You're going to a deadly force fight with deadly force. It looks like deadly force mutual combat. And if you're a mutual combatant, you've lost a key element of self-defense. You are a co-aggressor in that deadly force fight. You've lost the element of innocence. You've lost self-defense, even for defense of yourself, much less defense of property. So, of course, on a practical level, the car thieves are, I mean, in a sense, they're making sense, right? Do you want to die over a car? Do you want to get into a gunfight over a car? I know some of you will say yes, but you have one life. You'll probably own many cars. Just something to think about. I can tell you personally, there's no way I'm stepping out of my house to keep my car from being stolen. I'm not doing that. Now, I'm not telling you what to do. I don't tell other people what to do. I just try to help other people make informed use of force decisions based on the actual law, because I don't want to see you in a position like this. So this was the Twitter discussion I had earlier today. Presumably this is a pseudonym. Again, I'm not trying to denigrate this guy personally. He's probably a very nice person, just ill-informed about the law. So he was having this discussion with somebody else on X, and somehow I got, I don't know, LinkedIn or whatever they call it. And so I became part of the discussion. And I saw this. There are two different things. He's talking about trespassing in defense of property. But in states like Texas or my own Oklahoma, you can fire upon a trespasser out of defense of your property. The notion being that they're trespassing on your land to commit further crimes. So what's the scenario here? A simple trespasser on open land, right? It's not a home invasion. There's no claim here of any interference or destruction or taking of property or any threat to persons. We're talking a simple trespasser, someone standing on your land without license. They're not allowed to be there. And perhaps you've told them they're not allowed to be here. Get off my land. Can you fire upon that person? Can you use deadly force on that person? The answer is no. You're not allowed to do that in either Oklahoma or Texas. But this person believes the answer is yes. So I informed him that no, in states like Texas or Oklahoma, you can't use deadly force upon a simple trespasser. That's not the law. And I get this typical kind of response. People say, well, according to Oklahoma law, a person has the right to use force, including deadly force, to defend themselves or others from imminent danger in their home, which is true. In fact, you don't even need the in your home part. you can defend yourself from imminent danger. And if that imminent danger is deadly in nature, you can defend yourself with deadly force. But that's not a simple trespass. That's a threat to persons. If there's an imminent danger to persons. And in the home, it's a defense of highly defensible property, not simple trespass. Open land, undeveloped land is not highly defensible property. It's least defensible property. But he throws in here parenthetically that you can use force, including deadly force, to defend. And then he throws in property or trespassing if that is the case, or any other place to have a lawful right to be present, which is not relevant to the discussion here. Well, is it true? Trespassing? You can use deadly force in defense against trespassing? So I pointed out that being in imminent danger and a simple trespass are not the same things. Imminent danger is the threat to persons. You can use force against a threat to persons, and you can use deadly force against a deadly force threat to persons. That's not the same thing as a simple trespass in open land absent a threat to persons. As I wrote here, someone merely standing on your land is not by that act alone presenting any danger whatever, and you've no privilege to use deadly force upon them at all. And then I invite, maybe I'm mistaken, or show me the actual law to the contrary. And he had previously said something like, well, I've been told this by a district attorney and a sheriff and blah, 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 blah. And I don't care about that because what those people say is not law. And often they're mistaken. So then he very kindly responds with some actual Oklahoma law, Texas statute, section 21643. And of course, he clips out the little paragraph here. In fact, I'll pull up the entire statute. Let's see. Oh, here it is. So I can share this. Let's see. So we don't just have the little paragraph. Oh, kind of small looking. Let me make that bigger. So this is the statute he's referencing. Lawful use of force upon another, circumstances. The use or the attempt to offer to use force or violence upon or toward the person of another is not unlawful in the following cases. And then he cited paragraph 3 here. When committed either by the person about to be injured or by any other person in such person's aid or defense, in preventing or attempting to prevent an offense against such person, or any trespass or other unlawful interference with real or personal property. So that's what we're talking about here. Trespass on real property, open land. And this says you can use force. You can use force. The use of force is not unlawful to remove a trespasser on real property. And that is true. That is correct Oklahoma law, as we see right here. But what doesn't it say? It doesn't say deadly force. It says force. You can use non-deadly force to remove a simple trespasser from your land. You can threaten to use non-deadly force. You can use non-deadly force. You can take them by the arm and walk them off your property, shove them off your property. But it doesn't say you can use deadly force against a simple trespasser. Oklahoma does have a statute that addresses killing someone and when that's justifiable, but it's not this statute. It's this statute. Whoops. Did I pull up the right one? Let me see. Justifiable homicide by other persons. When they say other persons, they mean non-police officers. The immediately preceding statute is when police officers can use deadly force. So this is justifiable homicide by non-LEOs. So this is when you can kill. A homicide is justifiable when committed by any person in any of the following cases, when resisting any attempt to murder such person or to commit a felony upon him or upon or in any dwelling house, so highly defensible property. So we have threats to persons here, murder or felony threats against persons or in highly defensible property. That's very common. When committed in the lawful defense of such person, when they reasonably believe such defensive force is necessary to prevent death or great bodily injury, or to commit the commission of a forcible felony, which is a felony that threatens death or great bodily injury. Again, threat to persons here, not a simple trespasser. Or when necessarily committed in attempting by lawful ways and means to apprehend any person for any felony committed, or in lawful suppression of a riot, or in lawfully keeping and preserving the peace. But there's no trespasser here. So there's no provision under Oklahoma law in which a simple trespasser can be dealt with by the use of deadly force. And I point that out in this Twitter exchange. Where in that paragraph that he sent me does it say you can use deadly force for those purposes? Stopping a simple trespasser, it does not. For the killing of another person by a non-police officer to be lawful, absent the context of highly defensible property, you have to look to Oklahoma statutes 21733, which we just looked at, which does not privilege the use of deadly force against a simple trespasser. So again, I don't think this gentleman is a bad person or attempting to spread misinformation. I think he believes what he thinks to be true. But what happens often is that people believe what they'd like to be true in the use of force context. On an emotional level, they'd like to believe that they can use deadly force to stop a simple trespasser. And the result is confirmation bias. They'll see a statute like this. In fact, I'll pull it back up on the slide. They'll read this little snippet out of context that allows for the use of force against a simple trespasser and just jump to the conclusion that that also includes deadly force. It does not. And that's why just reading statutory language can be a very, very dangerous thing. Now, what if this car theft were happening not in San Jose, California, but were happening in Texas? Would deadly force be permissible? Could this car owner lean out his window with a scoped night visioned AR and just start shooting these thieves to prevent the theft of his property? Well, fortunately, Texas has actual law on that. And that law is Texas Penal Code 9.42. By the way, if you ever want to read this yourself, you can just go to lawofselfdefense.com/942. That's how often this comes up in discussion. Again, we covered it just earlier this week, but it never hurts to cover it again, I suppose. By the way, for those of you on YouTube watching, keep in mind, if you have a question or comment you'd like me to address, it needs to be a $10 super chat on YouTube, or you could become a Law of Self-Defense member for just 99 cents and get your questions and comments answered for free on the member dashboard. That 99-cent membership is available at lawofselfdefense.com/trial. That's what I would encourage you to do, of course. But if you're on YouTube, if you could hit that thumbs up button and why not subscribe if you like this content? We're just over 63,000 subscribers now. Keep making progress, baby steps. 63,178. So let's add a few more. Hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button, always appreciated. All right, so let's take a look. Texas Penal Code 9.42, deadly force to protect property, and they mean personal property here. They have separate law for highly defensible property like a home. They're talking just personal property, items, tangible property, or open land, real property, unimproved land. And Texas is the only state that has a provision for the use of deadly force in defense of mere personal property in the absence of a threat to persons, in the absence of the context of highly defensible property. A person is justified in using deadly force against another to protect land, that's simple trespass, or tangible movable property if he would be justified in using force under section 9.41, the preceding statute. Well, 9.42 is deadly force to protect property. What do you think 9.41 is? It's the use of non-deadly force to protect property. So first, you have to meet all the conditions of 9.41 before you even consider qualifying for the use of deadly force in defense of property. 9.41, a person in lawful possession of land, let's stick to land here, is justified in using force against another when and to the degree the defender reasonably believes the force is immediately necessary to prevent or terminate the other's trespass. All right, so perhaps first you ask the person to get off your land. Of course, here that's the Oklahoma Twitter exchange analysis. Here, of course, we have the car tangible, movable property. An unoccupied car would certainly qualify as tangible, movable property. So to prevent or terminate the other's trespass on land or unlawful interference with that personal property. So you can use non-deadly force. It doesn't say deadly force. So deadly force requires additional conditions, as we'll see in just a moment. Or if you're dispossessed of the land or property, so you've been thrown off your land or the tangible movable property has been taken, you can use non-deadly force against the taker to recover the property or re-enter the land. If you use the force immediately or in fresh pursuit of the property, and some other provisions here, like it's not a repossession situation, or even if it is a repossession situation, the other party is using force or threat of force to take the property from you. Probably not a repo case then. So pretty clear, you can use non-deadly force to prevent trespass on real property or interference with tangible, movable property like the car theft. So you meet those conditions, then we can look back at 9.42, deadly force. So one can use deadly force. When and to the degree the defender believes the deadly force is immediately necessary, and there's two alternative paragraphs here, they're separated by an or, and they both enumerated particular underlying crimes. The first paragraph deals with someone committing or imminently about to commit one of the enumerated crimes, and the second deals with someone who's in flight immediately after committing one of these enumerated crimes. So first, deadly force can be used to prevent the other's imminent commission of arson, burglary, robbery, aggravated robbery, theft during the nighttime, or criminal mischief during the nighttime. Well, what do we have in the case here of the car theft? It looks to me like it's happening during the nighttime. So theft during the nighttime is one of the enumerated provisions for the use of deadly force in defense of personal property under Texas law, not California law, where this theft actually occurred. And then we don't even need to deal with the fleeing scenario here. And even if that's all true, you have to reasonably believe the land or property cannot be protected or recovered by any other means than the use of deadly force. That seems likely under this car theft scenario. Or even if that's not true, the use of force other than deadly force to protect the property would expose the defender to a substantial risk of death or serious bodily injury. Well, all the reason in the world to believe that's the case here, right? The thieves are screaming, don't come out here, you'll die. Don't die over your car. So under Texas law, the use of deadly force to prevent this car theft would fit very neatly within statute 9.42. Now, does that mean you wouldn't face any legal jeopardy if you use deadly force to prevent this car theft in Texas? No, there's always risk of legal jeopardy. First of all, the prosecution could just say, I don't like the fact that you shot 4 people dead over a car. That morally repulses me. So I'm going to put you to the test. Or at least I'm going to make your conduct extremely expensive for you. So even if the prosecution believed they had a 0% chance of conviction, if you shot 4 people, 4 car thieves in this scenario under Texas law, and it should be pretty close to 0, right? But even if the prosecution thought he had a 0 chance of conviction, he can still take you to trial. At the very least, he can charge you. And in killing cases, murder or manslaughter cases, which would be the charge here, the criminal charge here, very common in my experience on the cases I consult on for the defendants to burn through a couple $100,000 in legal expenses before they ever get to trial. So imagine you're lucky. Imagine you get the trial judge to dismiss the charges even before a jury's impaneled. So you don't have to go through the risk of an actual trial. That's great. That's a win. And it costs you a couple $100,000 for that win. And whether or not you're put to that test and that expense is out of your control. It's not up to you. It's up to whoever the prosecutor is on the case. And what if you don't get the charges dismissed? What if the 4th person you shoot had turned away at the start of your gunfire and you unintentionally shot him in the back? And the prosecutor is arguing, well, Your Honor, maybe the first couple of deaths were lawful, but not that last one. That last one, there was no longer a theft in progress. And therefore, there was no longer an imminent threat to personal property and no justification for the use of deadly force, even under Statute 9.42. That's our theory of the case. That's the argument we're entitled to make to a jury. And the judge says, well, okay, there's evidence to support that. So I'm going to let a jury hear it. Jury gets to decide the facts of the case, what they believe is credible and proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Folks, if you have to be put in front of a jury, the most innocent defendant in the world has at least a 10% chance of being convicted. That's just noise in the system. And if you're not the most innocent in the world, I mean, just look at Nikolai Mew, recently convicted just last week on a very weak narrative of guilt by the prosecution. But if the jury decides they simply need an excuse to find you guilty, and they'll accept almost any narrative for that purpose, you're looking at least a 50% chance of conviction. In the case of Nikolai Mew, I think he had a pretty much 100% chance of conviction from the start, once he was put in front of that jury. So you could do everything right. You could do everything lawful. This could be a car theft in Texas, and you use deadly force to prevent the theft of your car as provided for by Texas Penal Code 9.42, and still end up convicted of murder and sentenced to prison for the rest of your life. That's just noise in the system. So the risk of losing the legal fight's never zero, folks. It's always something greater than zero, just like the risk in the physical fight, right? It's never zero. I mean, you could lean out your window with your night-scoped AR and start popping bad guys, and they could just, kind of toss around in your direction, and you catch it in your eye. And you lost that physical fight. Low chance of losing that physical fight, given the facts I described, but it's not zero. It's some risk of death greater than zero because you're in a gunfight. Now, you can train and you can practice and you can use good cover and all that kind of stuff and reduce your risk of losing a physical fight darn close to zero, but it's never zero. Once you're engaged in the fight, the risk of losing that physical fight's never zero. There's no magic pixie dust that says the good guy wins the fight. And the same is true of the legal fight. All this stuff we teach at Law of Self-Defense helps you be as hard to convict as possible, reduces the risk of that legal fight to as close to zero as possible. But it's never zero. Now, I don't tell people when to use force in defense of themselves or their family or strangers or property. I don't tell people what to do, period. That's up to you. I can only try to help you make informed decisions. Some people will decide that the physical risk and the legal risk of using deadly force in defense of their car in this scenario, and let's presume they're in Texas because that's the only place it could be lawful, that the stakes they're fighting for, that car, are worth the risks. That's fine. That's your decision to make. Just make it an informed decision. Understand what the risks actually are. And then do as you think best. And I hope it all works out for you. Don't get me wrong. I have zero sympathy for the thieves. I could care less. But I do have concern for the members of our community. Again, I see questions and comments on YouTube, but if they're not super chats, I'm not going to see them, folks. So either make them $10 super chats, and it could be about the Mew case if you want, or you need to be a Law of Self-Defense member, which only costs 99 cents, folks, for a 2-week trial membership. And after the 2 weeks, it's still less than $10 a month to be a Law of Self-Defense member. So that's what I would recommend everybody do. Let me take a quick look and see if there's anything else I wanted to touch upon. I don't think so. I think I'll jump into the member questions. But don't forget, folks, tomorrow, Saturday, Law of Self-Defense Advanced class, our full-day course on how to be hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, your property. You can still get 25% off your registration for the next 22 hours and change. But we start up tomorrow at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. This is a live course. I teach it live, streamed to you at your computer using Zoom. We only teach it twice a year. It'll be October 19th before we teach this class again. Can you afford to wait? Do you know when you'll be attacked? You don't, right? That's not up to you. The bad guy chooses the time, place, and manner of attack. Come join me tomorrow. Learn how to be hard to convict. I translate all the actual law of use of force into plain English: defense of yourself, defense of others, defense of property, interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event, and much, much more, all at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. All right, now let's take a look at the questions from the Law of Self-Defense members who get their questions answered for free on the member dashboard. And apologies to everyone for being a bit late this morning. Let's see. A lot of comments while people were waiting for me to show up. Sorry about that. Law of Self-Defense member says, yeah, the car is a C7 Corvette, probably a Z06. Okay, I'll take your word for it. Jerry says, call 911 and let them do their job. Yeah, unfortunately, then they won't show up these days, right? I mean, it's hopeless. So nothing will happen. The car will never be seen again. If it is ever recovered, it'll be full of fentanyl and have to be totaled anyway. The car's just gone. Good question here. John O asks, would this be considered curtilage within view of your camera daily access? So there's certain privileges you get when you're using force in the context of highly defensible property, particularly your home. One of the benefits you get is something called the Castle Doctrine, and this is true in all 50 states. So the Castle Doctrine essentially says if you would have had a legal requirement to retreat, if safely possible, before using deadly force in a confrontation outside of your home, like out in the street, you're relieved of that legal duty to retreat if you're defending yourself inside your home. That's the Castle Doctrine. You have no legal duty to retreat inside your castle. And the reason for that is a good one. And the idea of a duty to retreat in the first place is that retreat is safely possible, and there would be a safer place for you to retreat to. That's the public policy behind the 11 states that impose a legal duty to retreat before you can use deadly force in self-defense. But once you're in your castle, there is no safer place to go, right? You're not safer if you exit your castle. So that's why you're relieved of that otherwise existing legal duty to retreat in your castle. Now, most states will include relief of this legal duty to retreat. They'll apply the Castle Doctrine not just within the four walls of your home, but also in the curtilage of your home. Curtilage is the area around your home that's part of the normal day-to-day use of your home. If you research curtilage in the law, most of what you'll come up with is search and seizure law, because it's often an issue in whether or not police needed a warrant to search something. And again, this is not a search and seizure law show, but generally speaking, if the police want to search inside your home or the curtilage immediately around your home that's part of the normal day-to-day use of the home, they'll need a warrant. So your garbage cans, for example, that are tucked up against the side of your house, almost certainly curtilage. And they'd need a warrant to search those garbage cans. But once you put the garbage cans out in the street, they're no longer in your curtilage. Now, where curtilage ends is ambiguous. There's generally not a black and white line in the law. It's subject to subjective judgment calls. So the further you get away from the structure of your home, the more tenuous the claim of curtilage. If you live on 40 acres, that 40th acre off in the woods is probably not within the curtilage of your home because it's not part of the day-to-day use of your home. For sure, however, curtilage has ended once you no longer have a right of exclusion, the right to exclude people from that space. So once you reach the end of your property and it's a public street or a public sidewalk, you don't have the right of exclusion there. That's definitely no longer curtilage. So when you put your garbage cans outside on the street for pickup, now they're outside your curtilage. In the use of force context, the curtilage really would only apply in the context of whether you had a duty to retreat before you can interfere, use force against these car thieves. Curtilage does not extend the special privileges, other special privileges for the use of deadly force in defense of your home, highly defensible property, because those scenarios, the trigger for like the legal presumption that you were facing a threat of serious bodily injury, they apply when there's an unlawful enforceable intrusion into the home. So they don't apply outside the home. I mean, you wouldn't need that here anyway, because the threat of death is being patent, right? You don't need a presumption that you're facing a threat of deadly force. It's being communicated to you explicitly. Now, from what appears to me in this picture, I don't know if this would be curtilage or not. I mean, when we go to the wide angle view, this doesn't look to me like private space anymore. It looks to me like I've lived in apartment complexes, and it looks to me like, first come, first served, common space of an apartment complex. And just like if you're in a hotel room, that hotel room while you're staying there is your castle for purposes of castle doctrine, for purposes of highly defensible property. It's your dwelling while you're dwelling there. But the moment you're out in the corridor that everybody has access to, the common space, well, then you've lost that. You're no longer in highly defensible property. This looks to me like first come, first served parking. So you wouldn't have a right of exclusion, and you wouldn't have any special highly defensible property claims there. Robert says, so if the owner steps out of his home so he could use non-deadly force to protect his car, is he not then immediately faced with deadly force that would allow him to shoot all of the thieves? Well, I think I spoke to that already. In theory, except the prosecutor would likely argue that you never intended to use non-deadly force. You knew the minute you walked out there, you were going to be subject to deadly force, unlawful deadly force, but you went to a deadly force fight. The fight didn't come to you. You went to that fight. And that makes you a deadly force mutual combatant, which is not a lawful use of defensive force. Let's see. But what about your motorcycle? Yeah, I mean, I'm always shocked, folks, when I take my trips and I wake up in the morning and I look at my hotel window and my motorcycle is still there. Just they're so easy to steal. But I've never had one stolen. But no, I wouldn't go out there and get into a gunfight over my motorcycle either. Another great question. Law self-defense member Gene. What if you were not in the house when they told the house not to come out, but you were out walking the dog and came upon them stealing your car, and you were carrying, and then you pulled your firearm? Yeah, so that would be different, right? So you're outside, you're walking your dog, you're coming back to your front door, and you see a bunch of people engaged in theft of your vehicle, and you say, hey, stop that. So you're not even threatening force. Stop that or I'll kick your butt. Now you are threatening force, but only non-deadly force, let's argue. And they say, stay back or we'll kill you. But you're already there. You're proximate to them, and they're threatening you now with deadly force. I would argue in that sense, what you're would actually be engaged in is not defense of your car, but defense of yourself. And it's not the kind of mutual combat scenario I described, because you didn't go there for the purpose of getting into a deadly force fight. You just came upon the fight. You didn't know that this scenario was taking place. So your arrival proximate to the theft was completely innocent. Then you find yourself facing a threat of deadly harm from the thieves. That's a defense of self scenario, not a defense of property scenario. And of course, you can use deadly force in defense against a deadly force threat. Yeah, and it seems likely, I think, based on what we see in the video, is that these car thieves would threaten you with deadly force, right? Stay back or we'll kill you. Don't die over your car. But even if they don't, there's a disparity of numbers argument here too, right? 4-1. 4 people can easily inflict death or serious bodily injury. And by the way, California is a stand your ground state. So there is no legal duty to retreat in California before you can use deadly force in self-defense. In fact, let me pull it up. California jury instruction 505, CalCrim 505, which you can pull up just by going to lawselfdefense.com/jury 505. The jury instruction on justifiable homicide. Let me scroll down. Here it is. A defendant is not required to retreat. He or she is entitled to stand his or her ground and defend himself or herself, and if reasonably necessary, to pursue an assailant until the danger of death or great bodily injury has passed. This is so even if safety could have been achieved by retreating. So he's allowed to pursue his assailant until the danger has passed. That's a pretty aggressive stand your ground statute. By the way, I saw another guy on Twitter just today saying, California is not a stand your ground state, but you don't have a duty to retreat before you can defend yourself. Well, first of all, those are the same things. Stand your ground means you don't have a legal duty to retreat. And for a state that's not a stand your ground state, it's weird that they would put stand his ground right in the jury instruction. Now, I think where some people get confused about this is that California does not have a stand your ground statute. California's stand your ground legal doctrine is found in case law, in appellate court decisions, dating all the way back to the late 1800s. So it's been law there forever. And therefore, of course, you find it in the jury instructions as well. The jury instructions tend to be an amalgamation of statutory language and case law, appellate court decisions. So yes, California most definitely is a stand your ground state and quite an aggressive stand your ground state as well. Okay, let's continue. Robert says, quick way to lose an argument, argue with Andrew about self-defense law. I've been wrong a couple times in 33 years of doing this. It can happen. That's why I always encourage people when they make a claim about use of force law that I think is incorrect, show me the law. Show me your statute. Show me your case law. Show me your jury instruction. Maybe I'm making a mistake. I will believe the actual law. I won't believe someone's just, representation of what they claim the law is. You have to show me actual law. Jeffrey asks, how often do modern courts take doctrines from other states and apply them, such as Texas law, or even doctrines such as imperfect self-defense? They'll sometimes do that. So a court in one state might apply a legal doctrine from another state, but they only do that in a kind of fill in the blanks way. So if their own state has not addressed a particular doctrine or a particular legal issue, it's blank. There's no existing law within their state that addresses this particular point. They might look to other states and see how other courts and other jurisdictions have addressed this, and they might adopt the approach of those other states. But if their state has addressed it, then they're not going to override their state law with some other state's law. That's not going to happen. So if there's no existing law on, say, imperfect self-defense, the doctrine of imperfect self-defense in a state, they might look to other state arguments on that question and adopt one of those arguments, but it would have to be fill in the blank. Here, California law on the use of deadly force in self-defense, deadly force in defense of personal property is very clear. It's just not allowed. So they're not going to, no court's just going to override existing California law with Texas Penal Code 9.42. Let's see. Looking at the members' questions. Someone says, would it be worth putting a self-destruct option on a California car? After a couple thieves get blown up, they may rethink their career choices. So this is actually a very old area of the law. Because people used to do this all the time. They would set up traps, essentially, often deadly force traps. They often were called spring guns, for example. So to discourage burglary of a structure Maybe they only visited occasionally. Maybe they had a barn someplace. And stuff was getting stolen from the barn. So they would set up a shotgun inside, pointed at the barn door, and set up a tripwire to fire the shotgun when the door was opened. And of course, they knew the shotgun was there and how to disengage the tripwire so they would not get shot themselves. But presumably, a thief who opened the door would get shot by the shotgun. You are allowed to use devices in defense of property, but you're not allowed to use deadly force devices in defense of property. So you might imagine a scenario in which, if your car's stolen, somehow the airbags get deployed, but in such a way that they trap the thief inside the car, but do not cause death or serious bodily injury. That might be lawful. That would be creative. But if you set up a device that, blows the thief up or projects a rod out the steering wheel into their chest, causing death or serious bodily injury, that would not be lawful. KT says, if you turn to the dark side and you shoot the car thieves in the knee with a shotgun, is that a use of deadly force? Yes, if you shoot somebody with a gun, it's going to be a use of deadly force. Doesn't matter where you shoot them. Let's see. Terry says, comment, as platinum membership is definitely worth it. My wife and I are happy to be Law Self-Defense Platinum members. Well, that's very kind of you. And recently we've been making platinum membership cheaper than ever. So platinum members, folks, the biggest draw of being a platinum member of Law Self-Defense as opposed to a standard member is that it's only platinum members are able to access my legal consulting services. So if a platinum member is involved in a use of force event and they're facing legal liability, they get my legal consult services, and they get them for free. So that's an expert analysis of the use of force event. It's consulting with their attorneys on how to optimize the legal defense in preparation for trial. It's me being there in the courtroom for their trial, me being an expert witness for them at their trial. That's all covered for platinum members. They get all of that for free. When we used to do that work for non-platinum members, we used to take consults from anyone who had a fat wallet. It was a minimum of $10,000, and then it went up from there. So quite costly. We don't take outside consults anymore. We only do consults for platinum members. They get the consult for free. No $10,000 retainer. We're just there for them. But you do have to be a platinum member at the time of the use of force event. The good news is you can become a platinum member for just 82 cents a day, which is pretty good. 82 cents a day gets you 5 years of platinum member coverage, plus every book, course, DVD, online stream class that we have to offer. In fact, it gets you a ticket to tomorrow's Law of Self-Defense Advanced class. A ticket for you and your wife, as a matter of fact, and your SO, I should say. Learn more about this at lawofselfdefense.com/82 cents. Yeah, remember, deadly force is not just force that kills. It's force that can readily cause death or serious bodily injury. Very difficult to imagine a gunshot wound that would not qualify as serious bodily injury. Yeah, and it's not that hard to kill people shooting them in the leg, folks. There's a big artery running down your leg. KT asks, question, if you open a door and let the pit bulls out, is that a use of deadly force? Well, yes, actually. In that context, if you're using a dog to inflict death or serious bodily injury, and certainly mature pit bulls are capable of causing death and serious bodily injury, if you're using the dogs in that manner, you're using the dogs as a weapon. And the nature of the weapon is the force you're reasonably anticipating will be inflicted. In this case, death or serious bodily injury. So you're using the pit bulls as a deadly weapon. Now, if your dogs are secured in your yard and someone hops the fence and gets attacked by your dogs, not at your command, well, that would be a different scenario. Perhaps there'd be civil liability there. I don't know. But you would not, in that context, have been using the dogs as a weapon. Clay says, I've been a platinum member since the night of the Law Chick special. No tie and bourbon branca makes for great deals. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And we gained a lot of platinum members that night. That was Natalie. Gosh, I just don't remember her name. But she was a lawyer who had a bad legal take on the Kim Potter trial, the taser trial. And we had a little discussion about it, her and I, on Twitter, and she did not fare very well, got quite upset and turned into a bit of drama. And I love monetizing drama. So yeah, she got me a couple nice watches and a nice BMW X4 out of that. Thank you, Natalie. You're the best. Be careful. It has to be a forcible felony for deadly force, meaning a threat to persons, not just any felony. Lots of things are felonies that don't involve a threat to persons. I am not, in fact, a fan of pit bulls. I'm not a fan, at least in if you live around other people. I mean, if you live on a farm someplace and your pit bulls are unlikely to interact with other people, then who cares? But I've just seen too many cases of pit bulls killing and maiming adults, women, and children. Let's see. And I know people love their pit bulls and they get very mad at me when I talk about it. Sorry. Just all I can do is tell you the truth as I see it. Paul says stealing a man's horse could be a death sentence in those days, like the late 1800s, right? So they would hang horse thieves, right? It was capital punishment for horse thieves. But actually, the rationale makes sense, at least in some scenarios, right? So if you were out in high desert, and you're scores of miles away from civilization, and there's hostile Native Americans around, and there's very little water, and you're on horseback. That's the mode of transportation of the era. And someone takes your horse and abandons you there. Is that likely to cause you death or serious bodily injury? I mean, we have to broaden the scope of what would qualify as an imminent threat. The traditional definition of imminence is a threat that's actually occurring or immediately about to occur. And that's probably not the case if someone just gets you off your horse and abandons you. But there's a broader definition of imminence that can apply, and that is that the threat of death or serious bodily injury becomes unavoidable if this happens. And that could be someone, pushes you out of a boat out in the ocean, right? And they're going to leave you there. Well, your death is unavoidable if that's allowed to happen. You would be privileged to use deadly force to prevent being pushed out of a boat in the middle of the ocean, even though the act of pushing you out of the boat is not likely by itself in the moment to cause you death or serious bodily injury. The same would be true of someone stealing your horse under conditions where loss of the horse would inevitably lead to death or serious bodily injury. Brian says, to add to the question, what if you are walking the dog and talking to the car thieves through the Ring camera on your phone? Then when you arrive to your home, they pull a gun on you and you end up using deadly force. Would a prosecutor argue you should have stayed away? The prosecutor would probably argue that you knowingly went to a deadly force fight. If the prosecutor wants to argue that, right? San Jose, California, you think they're going to want to argue that? Probably. I expect San Jose, California would have a much bigger problem with a law-abiding gun owner who killed 4 car thieves than they would with the car thieves, right? Car theft doesn't hurt anybody physically, they would say. Let's see. And of course, then they'll have the pictures of the 4 young men, graduating from high school or elementary school or looking adorable, presented to the jury in the media for 2 years while you're awaiting trial. You're the crazed killer, gun killer. Another act of gun violence over what? Something insurance would have paid for. Let's see. Kyle, who's a law enforcement officer, or at least used to be, I'm not sure. He says he ran on a dude who had robbed a store. When running, he hopped the fence into a yard with a couple of Rottweilers. Yeah, that's going to be a bad day. All right, that's all the Law of Self-Defense members. Let me take a look at see if there's any super chats. There were a number of good comments on YouTube, but they have to be $10 super chats, folks, or they don't get addressed. So let's take a look. And there aren't any. So all those great comments that could have been answered for free if only someone had spent 99 cents to be a Law of Self-Defense member. At lawofselfdefense.com/trial, they all go unaddressed. So sad. So unfortunate. All right, last mention, just because it's tomorrow, folks. Our full-day Law of Self-Defense Advanced class, where I teach you live, streamed to you at your computer, how to be hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, your property. We only teach this twice a year. It'll be October 19th before we teach it again. If you can't make it live tomorrow, register anyway, because we'll make the playback available to you for 2 weeks after the live class. By the way, it does take like a day for us to get the playback up, folks. So if that's your anticipation, it's not instant. We have to, it's a full day of video. So we have to download it. We have to do some post-production. We have to upload it to another server. But by the next day, the playback will be up. So even if you can't make it tomorrow, you can still get 25% off some of the bundles we have for this at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced for our advanced class. And with that out of the way, folks, oh my gosh, I went an hour and 11 minutes again. Okay, with that out of the way, it sounds almost silly to complain about it because tomorrow I'll be doing 7 hours plus talking to a microphone. All right, with that out of the way, I just remind all of you that if you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. If you do that for those reasons, then you also owe it to your self and your family to make sure you know the law, so you're hard to convict as well. Yeah, if you're, I did see somebody just popped in. Someone's asking, as a platinum member, how do they sign up for tomorrow's class? So the way we normally do it is if you're a recent platinum member, normally we include a ticket to the class as part of that. And if that's you, you should have received confirmation that you're registered for the class and received the link for how to join us and all that kind of stuff. I don't know that we just send every platinum member a ticket every time for the class. I actually don't know. But you can email support@lawofselfdefense.com and ask them what we might have arranged for that purpose. All right. But every platinum member should have had an opportunity to see the class at some time, usually when they first join up as a platinum member. All right, folks, until the next time, which for many of you will be tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mountain Time for this class. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.